So I'm very happy to be here. I've heard a lot of good things about UMBC from Andy on my staff. Glad to finally make a visit. I've heard a lot of work that you guys are doing is in the areas that I'm very passionate about. Now, you know, he gave this long title. Forget about the long title, all right? So I work in the Watson Cloud Division, and my team is a center of competency specifically focused on trying to get our customers and our partners to be successful in the new world that we're going to live in. Survive in the world they're in right now, but plan for how the world's going to look in a very short time horizon. So there's some very disruptive technology that is very close upon us, and some of which is already present. And those technologies are going to open up a world of additional opportunities. I mean, some of us, like myself, are old enough to remember the early days of the internet. And we didn't even envision really what the internet was going to be able to do for us at the time that it started happening, right? I think we're in a similar kind of situation here. We have technologies like quantum computing on the horizon, things like 5G that's right around the doorstep here in terms of being able to be really viable in society. Things are going to be possible from a device standpoint, from a services standpoint, that we can't even think of right now, right? And so what I think is important about the work that IBM does with universities like UMBC is to get ahead of where the commercial customers are. When you are doing a business, IBM's trying to service customers, trying to sell to those customers. We have to worry about figuring out how to monetize products and services, et cetera. And it's hard to be on the very leading edge of that. So that's where the work that with the universities really comes in. And so some of the discussions that I've had today since I've been on campus have been specifically around some of the things that I'm very passionate about. Like, for example, I think the world that we live in right now, the way we do security is archaic. It's been around for a long time. The security architecture is very much a north-south kind of architecture. It's kind of an overlaid off of the infrastructure. To me, the next generation of security needs to be baked into the actual transactional fabric, and it needs to be associated with the sharing of information and data. Right now, the security is associated with individuals and devices and such, but it's really not focused on how can you share the data. I have a saying that I like to say, like an analogy, that the way customers treat data today is they treat it like gold. They have a safe, they have a combination, and only a few people have the combination to that safe, but they can only look at the data. They can't actually use the data for anything, all right? That's the kind of world we live in. What I want to do is I want to have the enabling technology so we can liberate that data and put it to use. So instead of it being like gold, it's like oil. It gets its value from the usage of it. But in order to do that, we've got to change the way our data centers operate. Cloud computing has done a lot in terms of liberating infrastructure so people can get the infrastructure more quickly. But we still are bound by some of the traditional way that you do networking, the traditional way you do security, the traditional way you do data. So I do a lot of conferences and I talk about this perfect storm, all right? You might know that IBM bought the weather company, all right? So I started that acquisition, and I had a tour that I did during that year. It was called The Perfect Storm. And what I was talking about there is that you have some of these technologies that are coming together in a perfect storm. Meteorology, a perfect storm is when 3 or more natural forces come together with great magnitude. And that's what I think is happening today. You have AI coming together with cloud computing, coming together with blockchain. And then you have some emerging technologies that will fold up under those 3 categories, things like 5G, things like quantum computing. The world isn't built for that decentralized model. It's not built for being able to do things in a decentralized way. Traditional data center is all centralized. Security is centralized. Data processing and analytics are centralized. The problem with centralization is getting enough data to train the models. Right? So how can you change that dynamic? How can you make it such that I can train the models in real time? So during this presentation that I talked about having a cognitive loop between where the data resides and the back-end system that gives you an aggregate view across many different edges. So when I talk about an edge, what I mean is anywhere there's a source of real-time data that I could potentially get insight from and apply things like AI to. Many times when people talk about edges, they're talking about devices. What I'm talking about is data sources. And those data sources can be very diverse. If you think about an industry vertical like healthcare, you have lots of members of that ecosystem, some of which are very robust and very complex and very sophisticated in the way that they can do IT. Others are very simplistic and not sophisticated at all as it relates to IT. But they need to be able to work together. So some of the things that in my team that we've started is I happen to be the partnership executive for MIT. And so we created an AI partnership with AIT, specifically focused on trying to have AI work in the new world that's coming. This decentralized world, this world that's going to have the ability to provide more bandwidth and reduce the amount of latency, have more compute closer to the source of the data, and having, at the same time, figuring out how to mitigate the risk in terms of cognitive security. So one of the things that I talked about today when I had a meeting with some of the staff was specifically the focus that UMBC has around cybersecurity. I believe that the only way AI is really going to become prevalent in society is if I can use AI to protect AI. I need to be able to recognize what normal behavior looks like, and anything that's not normal behavior is then considered a threat. Because if you think about some of the processes that exist today in our large enterprise accounts, they're very subjective. They're based off of, quote, years of experience. But those years of experience were based off of a completely different set of technologies that could do only a limited amount of scale, a limited amount of performance, had a limited amount of reach. Those best practices don't necessarily are the best for the new world that we currently live in, and they certainly aren't going to be best practice for the world that's right around the door, right? And so what we want to focus on is how do we build the right things? How do we anticipate problems before they happen? And so in order to protect the AI and the data, we've got to be able to have a very much a focus on security, and the security models that exist today have to be significantly adapted to this new world we're going to live in. And I think UMBC, because of your focus on security, that's an excellent part, a point where we can collaborate on. Because I think you have a lot of expertise in that particular area. I know this is an area that we need to do much more in terms of an industry. So I think that's a good opportunity for us to do. So what I wanted to do is just kind of lay out some basic themes, if you will, things that really I'm passionate about, that IBM's passionate about, that the Watson Cloud Division and IBM as a whole is focused on, and then have a time for interaction such that more of a Q&A. Because to me, it's really boring, especially after lunch, hearing somebody like me just talk, all right? So I want it to be interactive. I think, like I said before, you're never ever going to know what the world's going to look like in a couple years. So important is basic premise, basic concepts, figuring out how to adapt to the world that we live in. Today, the way people make decisions, there's way too much subjectivity. If you can make objective decisions based off of real data in real time, that's the world that we need to live in. And that goes for decisions about security, decisions about automation, things like robotics to human interactions. Those are all going to be very much enabled by these new technologies so that we can do things that right now it's impossible for us to even know what the potential would look like. So it's a very exciting time to be in the IT field, in the computer science field, but it's also an interesting time because there's this blend cross-discipline-wise where before where colleges in the university system were kind of isolated, now there's this real opportunity to bring things in. You have humanities working with computer science around effective computing, understanding how to understand what the intent of a conversation is and how to apply that into a business context. So you have lots of these cross-disciplines now that really are really fascinating because the diversity of thought and the diversity of perspective coming together is going to train those AI engines more quickly, and it's also going to give us more and more possibilities to do more and more great things. So I'm really interested to hear what you guys are interested in, questions that I can answer, problems that you think we might are not focused on but should be. Anything's fair game, all right? So I'm going to open it up for questions now. Yes, I have a question back here. She's coming with the mic.
Hi, my name is Abidat. I'm a faculty here at UMBC. You said something very interesting. One was that, when I look at cloud, I think that cloud makes things centralized. But you said cloud is going to make things decentralized.
So that's a great question, all right?
Thank you.
So the world that we live in right now and the clouds that we have right now are very, very centralized. My assertion is that when things like 5G come and you have more and more compute, some of the great work that NVIDIA and some of the other vendors are doing in terms of being able to have a significant amount of compute in a very small footprint, you're going to see cloud be extended out to the edge. So in other words, instead of everything having to come back to a centralized location, the cloud extends out to the edge. So what you're going to have is you're going to have these edge compute. And so instead of having to bring the data to the compute, I'm actually bringing the analytical models and the compute to where the data resides. The other reason besides the enabling technologies like 5G that are going to make that transition, the other thing that you have to remember is the compliance and the security around data privacy and data locality are going to dictate you not being able to move data even as freely as you are now. And right now, like I said before, when I talked about the safe, it really doesn't flow freely. The data's not liberated, it's captured, all right? So if you're going to go to these use cases where you're liberating the data and starting to put it to use and you're going to interact with other companies. So one of the things that IBM's recently done is we did a joint venture with Mars, the Danish shipping company, specifically around global trade with blockchain and Watson and cloud, all right? And specifically, if you think about how freight gets from one location to another, it goes through all these different ports, people different touch it, there's all this paperwork. And what we want to do is turn that into a digital interaction where everything is digital. And everything is then, along the path, is documented in an immutable ledger that we call the hyperledger fabric, right? So that I can liberate that data, so now I can make business decisions based off of more information because I have more information that's available. But with that liberation of the data becomes a real possibility that I've opened up new threats. So some of these manual processes are secure from a data hacker standpoint because they're not accessible in a digital world, all right? I think all of those processes are going to move to digital, and with that transition, they're going to have to move to an edge-based cloud compute model, so the cloud gets extended out to the edge. And I also think that that means AI is going to get extended out to the edge, and I think the security model is going to have to be drastically different. So there's actually one of the VCs that I work with quite frequently is Andreessen Horowitz in the Valley. And Peter Devine, who's a friend of mine, he has a presentation, you can Google it on the web, it's called The End of Cloud Computing, all right? Very catchy title, but what he means by that is that the end, the edge of cloud computing, so cloud's going to be decentralized. There's going to still be centralized processes, but it's going to be stretched, if you will, out to the edge because with these new technologies, there are going to be more and more capabilities in terms of compute at the edge. So it's a really great presentation. He's a really great guy. So I think you'll like it. It's called The End of Cloud Computing. And it'll tell you basically the same kind of things. Some of the work that my team did led to him making that presentation. So like I said, I'd highly recommend taking a look at it. All right, other questions? That was a great question, by the way. She's getting her workout. If she's got her Apple smartwatch on, she's doing good on the steps now. So.
I had a question about the cloud. They have these programs now, like I looked at my phone and apparently I was talking and it went on to Google. The phone decided to ask Google a question, and they have things like Alexis, and you ask, and the internet kind of, hears and answers. And I'm wondering, with the cloud, is that being sort of included in the central, in the information on the cloud, and is there a loss of privacy for people?
Yeah, so that's another great question. So there's always this balance when disruptive technology comes out and it enables you to do things that you weren't able to do before. There's this balance between convenience, capabilities, privacy, etc. All right. Early days of the internet, I can remember thinking I'd never put my credit card information on the internet. All right. But the sheer convenience of it and the ability to get things on demand, it got to a certain point where I felt good enough about the security that I was willing to do that. The same thing with the mobile phone in terms of apps and data, etc. I think the same thing is existing here where there's a balance. There'll be some people that will be very uncomfortable with that kind of invasion of privacy, if you will. But I can tell you, like my two sons, that they wouldn't think about it, all right? They are happy to give as much information as possible. So I think what I was saying before, with these new kind of capabilities comes new challenges, new threat matrices that we have to figure out how to address. Yes, follow?
Yeah, here, hang on.
Yeah, I think the question was, does the data end up on the cloud? And the answer is absolutely, all right?
Like in your home, if you're asking Alexis or maybe Siri or Google decides that it's, when you're talking in your kitchen, that it's decided that it's going to ask the internet whatever you're talking about, that ends up on the cloud. And
yeah, so it does. One of the things that IBM has tried to distinguish itself from some of the other competitors that we have in the cloud space is we have a mindset that the customer's data, or in this case an individual's data, is their data, and they have the right to either want to share it or not. And so we have very strict guidelines in terms of all the work that we're doing, that we keep the data associated with an individual client. It's their data, it's their intellectual property. We use it for purposes of AI for them. Only if they're willing to share it do we then go beyond that. And so like I mentioned earlier, the MIT work is the Trust Data Consortium that we have. And in that particular case, what we've done is a collection of enterprise customers that are willing to share data for the greater good of a particular industry vertical, such that we could get better in terms of our privacy and have more personalized control of the individual. So in other words, I think in the future what you'll see is you, the individual, having the ability very easily and very quickly to determine whether you want to share this data or not. And so, but I do think IBM has made a conscious effort to make sure that we try to keep the privacy of the customer's data and individual's data, just that, their data. Right?
Thank you. We're done. I'm sorry. One more question up front here. Thank you.
What do you think about serverless?
A great question there about serverless computing. So I talked about things moving into a decentralized way. If you think about some of the use cases that we have for smart sensors and such, what you really want is you have a steady state, and there's certain data that exist in the steady state. But then you have an event that triggers a different view that you want. So in other words, if you look at what customers are doing today, it's really quite sad in some ways in terms of the way they get to an answer of data. They can't handle the volume of data, so what they do is they try to take a snapshot of the data, all right? Well, how big a snapshot? How often do you take it? It's completely subjective, all right? But if you can actually move your processing out to the edge where the data is located, and that you could basically look for just a trigger, and that trigger event causes you to start monitoring other things, then that is the way I think of the future. So this is like what I talked about, the cloud moving to the edge. One of the enabling technologies to do that is the serverless compute model. The Lambda data architectural model Some of the work that we've done around our cognitive edge fabric is very much around that space. So I think that is the way the world is going to work. And you see the VC investment in the companies, the startups in the Silicon Valley, as well as New York, Boston, et cetera, very much focused on this new architectural model, right? They won't spend money on a new company if they aren't associated with this new model, this decentralized, serverless compute, containerized microservices type model. That's where the investment is. And I'm kind of the Jerry Maguire principle, follow the money, all right? Show me the money, all right? So follow the money and you'll see what the trends are. And so that's what we see, okay? Other questions? That was all great questions, by the way. All right. All right, thank you.